Welcome to the Flore Fantasy and Sci-Fi Lore. As Amazon is preparing to launch its Fallout series, we have decided it is a good time to dive into Fallout. So this will be the beginning of that. We are going to talk about Tim Cain, its original creator, and his work on the project. We're going to talk about the things that he talked about that inspired him and that he studied as he prepared to create this world. We will talk about A Boy and His Dog and Mad Max. We will talk about the Hugo winners that inspired the project, the Department of Justice. We will talk about CIA experiments, and we will talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis and all of these things that helped influence and create the world of Fallout. So if that is what you're interested, this is the episode for you. Roll the intro.
Do you remember the first story that was so spellbinding it drove you to break the rules and stay up all night to keep reading, keep watching, keep playing? So good, you forgot your life and lived there?
So good, the moment it ended, you asked yourself, what next?
Welcome to the Flore. Our goal is to take you back, take you deeper, to explore and understand more and relive that childlike wonder.
Join us as we dive deep into humanity's greatest stories, no matter how they are told, through books, movies, television, even games.
One of us does an in-depth research on the topic. One of us is familiar with the topic.
And one of us knows nothing. So the right questions will always be asked and addressed for anyone coming into the topic, regardless of how much you know.
Enjoy another world, another adventure, another spellbinding story. Join us on the Flore. Amazon has just begun to drop its Fallout series, and with that coming out, we are going to be diving into Fallout. This will be an introduction episode, so we're going to talk about where it came from, its impact, inspirations, kind of the origins of its creation. That's what we're going to be going over for the next episode or two, and then we'll be diving into the lore of Fallout. As most people who are familiar with the game, the lore of the game doesn't really start to change till about World War II. Like, our history and their history matches up, with a few exceptions that aren't major shifts in history before that, but then things start to take a drastic change. So, with that, we are going to begin with the beginning of Fallout.
Right, so let's tell them what Fallout is.
Yes.
Right, so Fallout, this game came out in 1997. And, you know, this game has been produced again and again in new forms, all with the title Fallout.
And then some kind of addition. So you've got Fallout 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got Fallout Tactics. You've got Fallout The Brotherhood of Steel. You've got Fallout Shelter. You've got Fallout New Vegas. You've got Fallout 76. So there's a lot of Fallout out there.
All right. And this is a what-if story if all the nuclear bombs have dropped, right? Ending a Cold War turned hot, right? This is a story of who's left, who will survive, and how. This isn't the day after the bombs have dropped, but many years.
Many years, yes. So I believe, Fallout is a post-apocalyptic story. As he said, this is if, two nuclear powers go to war and the world is now a wasteland. That is where this adventure will take place. But as he says, this is not the day after. This is 80, I believe the first story takes place 80 years after the bombs have dropped. So that's essentially what the story is. And so picking up a few essential points, as far as gameplay, we're talking an RPG. You play a specific character, you make choices, and it changes the world, and it changes the ending of that story. It was a turn-based tactic game, but some of the big things are just in this post-apocalyptic world that they built. They really did a great job. It was very interesting and unique, and so that's how it starts out as this game. And so I think probably the best place to start in understanding Fallout is A Boy and His Dog.
Yes.
So this is a story by Harlan Ellison. that is it's in this post-apocalyptic world, and he does encounter this kind of underground vault. It's this underground society where they're staying out of the radiation and a lot of the dangers happening on the surface world. And it's a very strange and bizarre society. And so this boy who is just out here surviving, it's just him and his dog, encounter this society, and it's really weird, and eventually they end up fleeing from it. That was a core inspiration for Fallout, is this post-apocalyptic world with the raiders and all kinds of monsters born out of radiation and, the dangers of surviving there, but also introducing these underground societies that function not like previous society, but very unique and different, somewhere in their own little thing. Mm-hmm. And so within Fallout, you do have this post-apocalyptic world, but in preparation for the Cold War going hot in the Fallout world, they built these giant vaults from a company called Vault-Tec. And so if this war started, you could then go to the vault where you had bought your spot and be safe from the bombs. This is an exaggeration of the underground bomb shelters that people had been building during the Cold War. And what is the movie with Brandon Fraser? Do you remember off the top of your head? The family has an underground vault in case the Cold War starts, and then something happens,
blast from the past.
Blast from the past, and so his family goes underground when he's just a small. No, his mom is pregnant with him, and they go underground thinking that the Cold War has turned hot, and then they come out to the regular world. Whereas the vault's not like a single family; it's a whole society in there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so this idea definitely explored in Fallout, but it's been explored by writers and storytellers in various avenues, particularly just born out of that Cold War, these nuclear weapons that would not just create an explosion and destroy something now, they would destroy it for thousands of years to come, and what's the long-term impact of that on societies? And, when you're trying to hide from that kind of destruction, you need a lot of lead and cement to protect you.
Right. So, at first came bomb shelters, right? World War I, people were building bomb shelters. In the 1990s, radiation is discovered. 1940s, nuclear bombs are...
You mean 1890s?
I'm sorry, 1890s is radiation is discovered. 1940s is the nuclear bomb is invented. And then the term Fallout comes out that following decade. And this is when they start building fallout shelters that are specifically meant to deal with fallout radiation.
And from the testing of the nuclear bombs and the impact on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, they begin to not just theorize the long-term effects of the nuclear bomb, but see the long-term effects of the nuclear bomb.
Right. So where the name Fallout comes from, what is fallout, right? So when you have an explosion on the ground, a bunch of dust gets kicked up, right? Now, if this is a nuclear explosion, that dust becomes irradiated and then settles on a much larger area than the blast radius. And many people argue that the fallout will kill more people than the original blast does, with those first two in Japan killing over 250,000 people each.
Right. Well, and then you have the long-term effects where you can't grow crops that are safe to eat there for generations, and so part of the idea of Fallout is the scarcity of food, because so much of the land can no longer be farmed, and the way it shifts weather, right?
I hadn't thought about shifting the weather or even water reserves, right?
Yeah,
plants are there, so nothing's holding on to water anymore.
Yeah. So these are the ideas of the post-apocalyptic world that go into Fallout, taken from the inspirations that they did. So in building this game, they had a few things. So they had a turn-based tactic game, and Tim Cain is the guy you really talk about when you talk about Fallout. This is his creation.
Yes. Yeah. He's that's his baby.
Yes. And so he talks about A Boy and His Dog, and he talks about other things. And one of the things he did mention is, as he was building the world of Fallout, he took the list of all the Hugo winners. So these are sci-fi stories, and he wanted to just read them all. And so that's what he would do at night. It was like homework for work, right? He'd get home from work, and he would read these books. And then there was another member of his team who, so the first 6 months of Fallout, Tim was the only one on the project. Like, it was just his baby. He was just building it on his own. And when they brought in more people to the team, one of the other members of the team started doing the exact same thing. And so there was inspiration now coming from a lot of different places. But again, if you've played Fallout and you watch A Boy and His Dog, be like, oh yeah, that's the core concept, right?
Yeah. Or if you've read the book or read the comic, all of it you can see. In fact, I want to do some direct correlation with A Boy and His Dog and Fallout, right? So first of all, we have the wasteland, obviously. Now in A Boy and His Dog, what has happened is, after the bombs, the cities got buried in mud. All right. So there's the wasteland on top that is like the waste, right? And then what is now the vaults in Fallout was actually just people dug into the mud, into these old cities, into the structures that remained, and that is like where they would hide out.
Yeah, okay.
And so if you notice, like, in A Boy and His Dog, he's just going along, there's a hole in the ground that people are going into, right? It's because they've dug into a building that was stand and it's just buried now, and they've used that as their shelters. Something that's mentioned in the movie, but you'd see in the comics or more in the books, is he calls them screamers, and these will be the ghouls in Fallout.
Yeah, so Fallout, in the creation of the world, you have humans who have survived the nuclear winter above ground. And then you have the vault dwellers who live in the vaults underground. But then you have two other groups. One is the ghouls. These are humans who have absorbed so much radiation that they no longer die of old age, but they're kind of rotting and still alive. And they have varying degrees of intelligence. Some are still fairly conscious and communicative, and some are just wild animals.
Right, feral ghouls.
Feral ghouls, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have the super mutants. So they have a virus called the Forced Evolution Virus, FEV, and this has then turned people into these various mutations, right? Forcing evolution on them, right? And so
they look like big hulking guys.
Yeah, various groups and factions within the world of Fallout. Now, humans break down into more and more factions. You have civilians, people who are trying to maintain society and live that way. You have raiders who are just like, it's the end of the world, take what you can grab, right, at the end of a gun. And then you have scientific groups, and you've got the Brotherhood of Steel, which is a technologically advanced society. Similarly, you've got the Enclave, another technologically advanced faction, and all of these people are then fighting over various resources and different things like that. And so the story is then you going through all of these, and it begins with you as a vault dweller. And the reason they wanted you to be a vault dweller in this post-apocalyptic world is so that when you emerge from the vault, you know nothing about this world. And this was one of the things Tim really wanted for you to experience, was that your player, your character in the game, didn't know more about the world than you did coming in as a new player. And so that way, when you emerge from the vault, you don't know anything. And neither does the vault dweller, because he's never been out here either. And so you're both experiencing this world brand new together. And that gives you a very authentic reaction to the world you're interacting with, because it's like, I don't know what's going on here. And they, you're talking to people in the town, and they do feel like, what is this about? And he wanted you to have that experience in the story, that I don't know what's going on. My guy doesn't know what's going on, and I've still got to figure this out.
Yeah. I think that was a wonderful way to start that game.
Yeah.
And the vault dwellers, they're in their vaults hiding out for a long time, and they're waiting for kind of the fallout to die out to come back and restart society.
Yes.
Right. Now, in the first game, you're not sent out because we're ready to come out of the vaults yet. A computer chip for the water purifier breaks. And they're like, we're going to need something. So go find something for us to be able to fix this.
Yeah. So within the world of Fallout, we talked about you have this post-apocalyptic wasteland. We talked about various groups surviving. So the vaults were set up as closed systems, right? It's an entire ecosystem that is self-maintaining, right? From food to water to waste, everything moves through an efficient cycle.
You just have to watch your population.
Yeah.
Other than that, it is fully sustainable. It is its own little bubble.
So, and there are two things here. One, there's nothing that ever will tell the people it's safe to go outside, right? It's just a decision they would have to make on their own. Not only that, but they don't have a lot of tools for monitoring the outside world either.
Yeah, they really don't.
They really don't. Like, you have like a camera that watches the entrance of the vaults, and that's it. That's everything they know about the outside world comes from that camera. And they've got to make the choice whether or not to go outside based on that. But, as Eli mentioned, the story begins when the water purification system in your vault stops working. So it's like, we are on a clock for when the water goes bad.
So let's send one of us out and see if they can do something about this, contact another vault, whatever it is, and see if we can get this fixed so that we can stay in here longer, because we don't think it's time to come out yet.
Yeah. So that is where the story begins. You leave the vault and begin your journey into the world. And what this does is, the fact that it's the water purification chip means that your vault is running out of water. So there is a clock on your adventure from the get-go. Every day that goes by, there's less and less water. And I think you have 150 days, and then they run out of water and start dying.
Yeah, and you've either got to fix it by then or get back and convince them
to leave.
To leave and somewhere else for them to go. Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more about the vaults, because this is our intro episode. We're talking about the inspirations. So he does mention that these were born out of like the Department of Defense, all these contractors that were hiring on during the Cold War, right? The U.S. government's military budget ballooned to 3 times the next spender in the world. And within that, you had a lot of smaller companies pitching and selling all kinds of products to the U.S. government, some of them kind of shady. At the same time, you had organizations like the CIA conducting experiments on the American people. And so these two ideas then merge into Vault Tech. So Vault Tech is this contractor company building these vaults, but they are also monitoring who will go into what vault and creating experiments. Each vault, with the exception of one, which is the control, then becomes an experiment on a human population. They're like, hey, we've got a closed system. This is a great time to figure people out. Let's run them through the mill. And so as you journey through the world of Fallout, you will encounter other vaults. And that's when you begin to see these experiments playing out, you know. And these are experiments that would never be approved in our day and age, right? They're wildly unethical. And at the same time, they're very interesting, right? Like, one vault has one guy and 99 women, and another vault has the reverse, right? 99 women and one guy. It'd just be like, what happens to that society? Let's see, you know? And there are, every time you encounter one, you see this new and bizarre social experiment. Not only that, but you're seeing this 80 years after these experiments have started, or depending what game you play, maybe it's 100 years after, 200 years after the experiments have been put into place. And you see what happened to these societies. Now, again, these are not real experiments that were done, so they're all theoretical, but they're all very interesting little pieces of this world, right? To encounter, be like, what did they do in this vault?
I had forgotten about the different weird experiments that were going on in the different vaults.
Yeah.
I'll be one for me to revisit for next time, for sure.
But you're out there and you're trying to get this chip, and you'll interact with cities and the raiders. You'll encounter the Brotherhood of Steel. You'll encounter the super mutants, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Tim did is he wanted pop culture references and jokes, but he wanted them that you could get them even if you didn't get the reference, right? That if it was a joke, that it would still be funny, and all of that. And that's a big part of the first one is as they had written these pop culture references and jokes into the game to be like, okay, if somebody doesn't get it, is it still funny? And that's a piece we miss going forward, right?
Interesting.
And then a lot of that is that Tim leaves the project before Fallout 2 is completed.
Okay.
But back to inspirations and origins. So Fallout, what they wanted to do was build a game and a world that was based on what the 1950s imagined the future would be like.
Right. It has a 1950s theme all over it.
So as they were building the world, the weapons, the cars, the houses, TVs, everything, the
instructions.
They went and they looked at the style and like popular mechanics and just different things that people were imagining, for in the 1950s about what that future would look like. And they used this to build the game. But a lot of the pieces of technology from the 1950s, they don't update. So like the TVs still look like they're from the 1950s, and they didn't have microwaves in the 1950s, but they still have that style to them. This is almost like a beautiful weaving of inspiration and lore, because it is the late 1940s, late 1950s when the game lore changes from our own trajectory in history. Whereas in the post-World War II world, we tried nuclear power, and after a couple incidents kind of backed away from it, but we never really harnessed it. But in Fallout, they went from nuclear fission to nuclear fusion, and then they shrank it down. So then all their technology runs on nuclear power. And this creates a world where pollution is not the huge issue. This creates a world where radiation is the huge issue. It's everywhere, and you're constantly dealing with it, even more so in the post-apocalyptic phase of the world, because the nukes have been dropped.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we get into the lore in later episodes, we'll cover this. But the Fallout War, the war that made all the bombs drop, is there was oil shortage in the world, and it was just all running out, and people were grasping for it as best they could, and that's what will cause this final war that launches all the nuclear bombs, right? So oil was already running out in this world. Gas was already skyrocketing, just all petroleum products were just running out of control.
Well, and as much as they're switching over to a lot of nuclear energy, your plastics are still petroleum products.
That's right.
So even if it's, there's less need for the fuel because you've got the nuclear fusion, you still need them to make your plastics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but So, anything else on the inspirations here you want to go into? I mean, there's kind of a lot, but also.
So we never talk about Mad Max, right? So
right,
boy and his dog, no cars, right? Mad Max, they're like, let's take aboard his cars and lots of cars, lots and lots of cars, right?
And Tim even mentioned one of the designers essentially just put Mad Max on a loop, like turned off the volume and just let the movie roll over and over and over. Mm-hmm. Play, rewind, just to keep him in that world and inspired.
Keep those visuals coming at him.
And so, yes, definitely should have brought that up earlier in this episode. Mad Max, yes. So you take a boy and his dog and Mad Max and you smash them together and create a video game, you get Fallout. Yeah. So both of those were huge, huge inspirations on the project.
Mm-hmm. So with Arlen Elson writing A Boy and His Dog, as he was writing this, he wanted to create a world where, he's thinking about how horrible everyone's going to be in the future. And he's like, the three main commodities will be weapons, food, and women, right? So like women have now become a commodity, and in the film, it comes off very misogynistic, whereas in the writings, it's more misanthropic. Everybody hates everybody, right? Everybody's a horrible person. And he kind of shoots for that, and is writing this story as a love story between the boy and his dog, right? And saying like there will still be that love in the world, but what is it going to look like in this horrible world where everyone's horrible? And you know, of course, when you play Fallout, you get that choice, right? You can be horrible or you can be good.
Yes. So it's
open world that way.
Open world. Yeah. So there's a lot of moral dilemmas where there's a bunch of ambiguous outcomes, but there's also some straight up just you were just ruthless, you know. In fact, like the game even introduced you can just like shoot anyone, shoot anybody. You, go ahead.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Which wasn't popular in games yet, right? Like there are a bunch of games that allow that now, but back then that was kind of
pretty
thing.
I mean, I think actually I think Baldur's Gate comes out after this, but in Baldur's Gate you could attack anybody as well. Yeah, you mess up storylines and quests, but you can do it.
You can do it. We're not stopping you. We're not putting immortal NPCs that say one word to you and then they just stand there the rest of the time.
Yeah.
I guess also we didn't really cover what one of the big inspirations for this was in 1963 we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, right, or the Bay of Pigs. Right, the U.S. feared that foreign nuclear weapons could be stored right off their coast and be launched onto their territory. And this led them to make a deterrent defense program that would involve over 400 nukes targeting the military, industrial, and major cities to destroy 1/3 of Russia and over half of its industry, right? And then Russia, in return, made similar plans. This soon after will come the phrase mutually assured destruction, also known as MAD. Right, and this is really where this story gets inspired from. Of what if this is no longer just a deterrent? What if that actually just happens? Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say, you know, that needs to be brought up as far as inspirations for what Fallout is.
Yeah. So definitely a big lore point there, inspired by that. But instead of it being resolved, it goes off.
Yeah. Just for funsie here, Boy and His Dog, the movie sets it in 2024.
Yes. Oh, I totally forgot to bring that up. Yeah. The movie does set it in 2024, which is a little bit fitting considering it's 2024.
Yeah. It's the year 2024 after World War IV. And in that one, they say World War IV was 5 days long. Right? That is how long it took for them to go. War, hit the button, all the bombs drop. And another really cryptic thing he puts in there is the politicians have solved the urban problem. Right. Very critical of things. And
yeah. So I know that in Fallout, they refer to the Great War, and the Great War is 2 hours. Right, so it's like they're like,
it's a bad morning.
Somebody launches, and the other guys launch, and then they hit, and then the war's over because mankind has been, you know, we're not completely rolled back to the Stone Age, but you know, it's technology is broken. There are some people with almost nothing, and there are other people who still have quite a bit of access. You know.
Yeah, it reminds me of Einstein's quote of. I don't know what weapons World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones.
Right. Well, and this is a deeper imagining, you know.
Yes.
Like, there will be leftover pieces of tech that people find and use. There will be people among those who understand those and can continue building on them. There will be parts of the world not harmed by this that will, even if their technology is not the most advanced right now, it will be then, right? Because it is still intact. And so, like I said, it's a much deeper imagining of what that actually looks like when you nuke. Because, the Great War isn't nuking the whole world. It's just nuking the, big population centers. It's nuking, rival powers. But there is kind of a nuclear winter after, right? As we mentioned, this is 80 years after. And so that winter has a big effect on things as well. All that radiation killing off large sections of the population, famine, starvation coming as a result of the climate change. And so, like I said, you end up not everybody's wielding sticks and stones, but you meet a few people who are, that's what they got.
Yeah, that's what they got. That's what's available to them. Or your rifle runs out of ammo. It's a stick.
It's just the club now.
Yeah.
And you're out of bullets. And, nobody's really making bullets. I think we see this in The Walking Dead, right? Ammo's a big deal. And then at one point, a guy finds a way to manufacture it, and that's a big deal. Like, you can create ammo, that's huge.
In the latest Mad Max, one of the factions is called the Bullet Farm, right? These are the guys who are making bullets.
Yeah.
And then I think it was Fallout 3 or 4, where you could start crafting. Right, and making your own ammo was a big thing, and then collecting all the stuff became a lot more important rather than just selling your junk for pennies. You're like, no, I can some of it. I can make ammo out of this, and that's really useful.
Yeah. So I do remember the first game, like less so late game, but early game, like ammo is just
Scarce,
so hard to come by. Yeah, it is scarce and everything. So. I guess this has already gone way longer than expected, but we do need to bring up Wasteland because a lot of people felt like Fallout was very much, a spiritual successor to Wasteland. And Tim actually talks about how, like, it wasn't actually inspired by that very much. And I think a lot of it is more, they just took inspiration from a lot of similar things, very similar ideas coming out. And his combat was based on XCOM. So that's a big thing because they do look very similar. But if we look at all the stories being told in this world, the events of World War II and the Cold War led to a lot of storytellers imagining this post-apocalyptic world. And there's a lot of similar things: the wasteland, the radiation, the mutations. And I think that's where a lot of those similarities are born out of is, just that there was a lot of storytellers thinking about this during the Cold War period. Now, granted, Fallout is made in the 1990s, but it still takes a lot of its inspiration from the 60s and 70s and even as back as the 50s.
It's that atomic era, right? When it was...
the atomic age.
And that's kind of what they ran with, of like, let's take the atomic age and kind of freeze it and then put it into into a post-apocalyptic future.
Oh, and their stat system's special. Originally, they wanted to use GRUPS, which is the generic universal role-playing system.
Well, that's what Tim used to work on, right?
Yeah. And so what this is if you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, it's a tabletop system. In this fantasy setting. And there was a bunch of systems. There were ones for sci-fi. There were ones for post-apocalyptic. There were ones for Western. And so the guys who developed GRUPS, they wanted a system where you could basically build that character and play them in whatever world you wanted and it would work. And so we're talking about the stat system. So in Fallout, you're talking about special, right? Strength, perception, endurance, all of that. So originally they had wanted to use GRUPS, but as the game was finishing up, they showed it to the original creator of GRUPS because they were, licensing it to use it. And he did not want his system associated with it because it was so violent. And so he asked that they stop using it for Fallout. And that is when they created the special system instead.
Oh, I didn't know that. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
But yeah, so originally they were going to use Grups, but then they had to create their own system because he was like, it is too violent. But I mean, I remember watching the violence of Fallout early on, and like you would take a submachine gun, and I don't know if it was a crit or just like a small chance, but sometimes you would just shred that guy.
You'd fall into pieces, and the legs would stand there for a minute.
As a kid, I just thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
So yeah, so for the time, it was pretty graphic and gruesome. So I know there was like a gore option you could turn on or off,
which would get rid of the blood and dismemberment.
Yeah.
Right. That's like the two main things it would turn off. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of the origin of Fallout. It was a game created by Tim Cain and then a few other members of the team. And it is really just taken off from there, but we'll probably explore that in another episode.
Thank you, as always, for joining us.
So, this has gone a lot longer than expected. We're probably going to skip the treasure room on this one and just count that as the extra content here. Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We have mentioned in the past that if you go to the Patreon page, we have collections of all the different worlds and pieces of lore we have covered. For example, if you want everything we have ever done about Baldur's Gate, from the invention of D&D to Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that, you can find individual collections for all of those, or just one big collection containing all of Baldur's Gate or all of D&D. So everything we have covered, Eberron, Marvel, DC, Aliens, Xenoverse, Cyberpunk, Dune, and more. We have collections for each of those worlds. And I do want to mention that on the Patreon, the only thing behind the subscription is the Treasure Room content. Anything that has been released in the podcast for free is still free there. It is just a better organization of the information that the podcast app doesn't let us do. They are just a big list, and you just got to type in your search words. On the Patreon, there are tags for everything. You got fantasy, D&D, creature features, Baldur's Gate 1, Baldur's Gate 2, Dark Alliance, all of that. Just an individual tag for those episodes. And as I said, we do have collections just to make this as easy as possible to find what you're looking for. We have learned in the past that a lot of people who listen to The Flore, they're interested in one or two of the worlds, and they may check out one or two of the episodes when we switch worlds, but they're really just mostly interested in that. So we just want to consolidate everything you're looking for to make it just as easy as possible to access. So check that out just to make your life easier. And we are working at making sure you can download any of the free episodes there. So even if you're going to lose Wi-Fi or connection, you can get the episodes you want before that happens, or just not burn your data while you're traveling to and from work or whatever else is you do while you listen. And thank you. I hope you continue to enjoy the show.